We have 11 wonderful readers for you. And all of these readers have their pieces published in this book, Our Mothers. The inspiration for this book came from our dear friend, Mary Callahan, good friend to many of us here. Mary Callahan was the founder. She sadly passed away. She's the founder and was the director for years, gave her blood, sweat, and tears to Buffalo Peace House. Buffalo Peace House is in Hamburg. It's a refuge for asylum seekers. And as we all know, at this time in our country, these are people who are fleeing terrible situations in their home country and not finding a lot of support in this country. So all the proceeds from the book go to Buffalo Peace House. And they're $20. Evelyn has some. You can get them on Amazon, but it's important to support this really vital cause. Now, Mary Callahan was my good friend since college days. And in fact, she was always interested in World War II history. In fact, she did her senior thesis on that. And I helped her do research and with her boyfriend, Jim Callahan, who she ended up marrying. So she's always been interested in World War II history. And she was very fond of Tom Brokaw's book, Remember the Greatest Generation, talked about that a lot. Well, she was also a writer. And she said, what about our mothers? Our mothers were from that generation. And for many of us, included in the book, not all of us, but for many of us, the 40s and 50s, that was the era we were raised. And that's when our mothers were trying to make a go of it. They were at home. Maybe a husband was at war or they had a sick husband. So she encouraged many of us to write about our mothers. Well, then Mary was struck with cancer. She became ill. And our Evelyn Brady took up the mantle and continued the project, gathered a couple of us together to work on it, and sent out and asking people for their recollections of their mothers, and thus the book was born. And I think for many of us writing about our mothers, we learned more about them and we learned a lot about ourselves. So I hope you enjoy listening to all of our readers tonight. Margaret is first.
Let's see how it works. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Margaret Guillaume. I'm going to read you a story about a moment in the life between my mother and myself. My mother, Margaret Telesco Mineo, who was with us on this earth from 1919 to 1995. The title of the story is My Mother Reveals Me. I sit opposite my mother on a warm spring afternoon at a table on the patio of Cecilia's, a little restaurant in the hip new area I'm moving into after moving out of what is now my husband's house. This isn't where I expected to be 20 years ago when I married him. He was an offbeat and wildly creative theater artist with huge appetites, huge thirsts, huge needs. I was caught up willingly in his wake. My mother, though, saw through all of it. Red flags littered the lawn. One by one, she picked them up and held them out to me, but I was colorblind. I was 20 years old, in love, pregnant, and so very naive. You're wrong about us, I'd shout. We're different. She wasn't. We weren't. And 20 years later, here we are, having dessert and sipping coffee as we've done so often together, except at this time, only she is wearing a wedding ring. My mother and I have always been close, our relationship seamless. We've never needed many words to communicate what we were thinking. I didn't necessarily confide in her the way my sisters did, but I have no doubt she could feel my pulse from across the city. Often, during those dark years of my marriage, out of fear or frustration, I would put the kids in the car and show up at her door. She'd greet us with a big hug, set them up with my father, and say, "Let's make eggs." We'd have eggs and toast and coffee. She would tell me about her doctor appointments, her priest friends, about the letters and cards she was writing that day. I'd just listen, say nothing of what was on my mind or in my heart, and I always felt lighter. Today, I want to speak. I want my words to reach her, to impress her. I want her to see where I have finally arrived after all the false starts. There are so many things I can say to her right now. I might tell her that she was always right about me and about my life, and that I should have listened to her more often. I might ask her what she thinks of my decision and if she has any insight or advice for me. I might tell her that beneath this awakened enthusiasm for my new life, I'm also terrified. I might ask her for help, for comfort. I don't do any of those. Instead, I talk and talk, my voice in the background of her words like bad elevator music. She wants to tell me about the family. I want to talk about me. Whatever news she gives me, I shut it down, negate it. I can't accept, I don't agree with, I can't tolerate. I feel the conversation going where I don't want it to go, but I can't pull the reins. I can't stop it. I want her to see me. I want to say, I'm not that naive child anymore. Look around, Mom. Look at where I am. I worked so hard to get here. But my self-righteous words are all wrong. They're like sharp shards I'm picking up and throwing. When I finally take a breath, she sets down her coffee cup and looks across the table. It seems there's a lot you can't tolerate, she says evenly. A seemingly simple statement, yet it undoes me. I'm unmoored. Me, intolerant? Her eyes are on mine like mirrors, gently, firmly exposing my misplaced hubris, all my layers melting in the hot June sun. As we leave the restaurant and drive home, I'm quiet, my words once again held within, along with all my unasked questions. The one burning question I'm too afraid to ask looms loudly. What litters the lawn now, Mom? What litters the lawn now? Thank you.
Hi, thank you everybody for being here, and thank you particularly, can you hear me? And thank you particularly for putting this together. There's a lot of work went into this event. My name is Irene Sipos, and I will be reading a poem about my mother. My mother's name was Honora Zackheim Simon. She was born May 2nd, 1915, and she died September 15th, 2003. Purses and pocketbooks. My mother loved purses. Did your mother too? Sometimes called a pocketbook, the purse had handles, one or two, and a firm clasp. No crossbody back then. As a kid, did you explore its contents? Did she let you take out a hanky, a lipstick? Maybe she had a coin purse, no folder of credit cards, no plastic, but likely a pack of cigarettes. Herbert Tarleton was my mother's brand. We would frequently walk to the corner drugstore. My mother liked to visit with the pharmacist, Mr. Book. She felt connected to him because her father, too, had been a trusted neighborhood pharmacist. Along one wall was a tiered display of paperbacks, also called pocketbooks, 35 cents each. My mother favored mysteries. She collected them as she did purses. My mother was never without a purse. One sat beside her when she drove the black Studebaker to meet friends for lunch. When she was reading or doing crossword puzzles in her favorite wing chair, she was snuggled between the little Pomeranian, Kibby, and a purse. Decades later, she would bring a purse from just next door when she would arrive for dinner. If she were wearing tan, it would be a tan purse. If black or navy or white, it would match. And when the hospital called for me to come say goodbye, although it was too late, there it was, tucked neatly in the bed, nestled as always under her arm. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Kathleen Heffern, and my mother's name was Catherine Martin Byron. And I entitled the reflection I made on my mother, and it was entitled "Offer It Up for the Poor Souls in Purgatory." And the reason I titled it that way is because every single time that I ever complained about anything going wrong as a young child, my mother's version of active listening was offer it up for the poor souls in purgatory. So, anyway, don't get me wrong, she was not a religious zealot. She was definitely not that, but she very much was a woman of deep faith, humility, and generosity. Catherine Elizabeth Martin Byron was born on June 19th, 1911, to Irish immigrant parents. She died on April 8th, 1998. Those intervening years are filled with examples of the qualities I have mentioned. She was very bright, but claimed my father was the smarter one, and also the holy one. She graduated from Mount Mercy Academy, and after that, she was a professional woman in retail advertising and a student at Millard Fillmore College at UB. Excuse me. She left a job that she loved because she was getting married. And in those days, working outside of the home was not acceptable. So she gave up her job. However, many years later, after raising 3 children, she scored very high on a civil service exam and worked for Erie County. She would not tell us her score, but my father did. Mm-hmm. She loved a good time too. And one time, a nun said how much all the sisters at our grade school liked her because she would bring beer for the sisters at the school picnic. She was a woman of wisdom with whom I could discuss ideas I learned in college, and she was open to learning and sharing and never closed her mind to new ideas. She did not mind disagreements either. As a grandmother, she modeled for me an uncritical, non-judgmental path. Never did I hear her ever criticize, say anything negative about how we raised her grandchildren. She loved my husband and the feeling was mutual. In her years as a widow, she took all of our family to plays and restaurants, short trips to downtown to see the windows at M&A's. And but the height of everything, as far as my children were concerned, is she bought a cottage at Thunder Bay in Canada, and she bought us donuts every single Sunday after Mass. So finally, her gracious acceptance of life at Macaulay Nursing Home after 2 strokes is what really sent me a message. She would often say, "There are others suffering worse than I." I am sure it had to be that humble faith that kept her strong. I remember her calling me one time and asking for the cards that had the mysteries of the rosary printed on them because she wanted to distribute them to all the other patients at the nursing home. She was very faithful to saying the daily rosary. No, she was not a zealot, but rather a woman who tried to live the gospel's message. She gave me a wonderful message. At her wake, when people told me that Catherine was the kindest, sweetest, and a very generous person, I could not have said it any better. I don't pray for her in purgatory, whatever that is, or wherever, but I do pray to her and thank her for everything she did for me. And I thank God for sending her to me.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm Kathy Shoemaker, and I'm actually, when we submitted this, my sister also submitted a piece, and my brother, but since they live in the state of Washington, they won't be here. But our mother's name was Helen Marie Ingle King. That was her maiden name, Helen Marie Ingle King Wall, and she was born in 1914 and died in 1991. So it's Memories of Mom by sisters born a decade apart and by our brother. I heard my mother laugh a lot. She was in love with my father and he with her. I knew they came first to each other before me, and they loved and delighted in me just the way I was. One of my earliest memories of my mother, on a summer night, she took my hand to take me in the backyard with her. She pointed up to the sky, and as I gazed at the Milky Way arcing overhead, she sang, "Starlight, star bright, first star I've seen tonight. I wish I may, I wish I might, have the wish I wish tonight." I don't remember my parents ever raising their voices at each other in anger or at me. Once in a while, Mom might slam a door in irritation, but most often she would rein herself in by saying, "What's the matter with me? I have 6 wonderful children and they're all healthy." After our country store closed for the day, my mother and dad were often in the kitchen together in the evening. They would feed us kids our dinner and enjoy their own dinner together once we finished. As much as my mother and father enjoyed one another's company, my mother also went out with her friends, was on a bowling team, played cards, and she and her friends would go out on the town sometimes. Another early memory of mine is wiggling through a kitchen crowded with men and women with drinks in their hands and leaning against a pair of legs while a hand would pat me, and then I'd move on to another pair of legs. We had rules in the household. Be respectful, do your chores, get good grades, tell us which direction you are going when you ride your horse, or even when you go out for a walk. When you get in from a date, wake us to say you are home. When I married and had my first baby, Mom still had 3 preteens at home, but she came to help me. She coached me to freshen up a bit before my husband came home from work. She told me to get a babysitter so we could go out in the evening. And she saw something on my newborn's eye that I would never have noticed, on the eye that he had removed 6 years later. I moved across the country and didn't get to spend much time with my mother as an adult, but I hope that I've inherited some of her happy genes. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you to those that worked so hard to put this together. My name is Karima Bondi, and I'm going to read a poem about my mother, Rosalia Gallo Bondi, born in 1932, passed away in 1993. The title of the poem is Mama Was a Wrecking Ball. My mother loved to demolish No knitting needles or embroidery hoops for her. She'd choose a sledgehammer any day. It was not unusual to come home from school and find the house altered. A wall might be missing, a stand of cupboards displaced, siding might be hanging mid-pole off the exterior. Ours was not a tidy home. It was always under construction, as if a team of unskilled laborers had taken up residence at our house, only to discover mid-job that they were in over their heads, pulling out and leaving us stepping over hunks of plaster, brushing sooty debris off the kitchen table, and trying to find the space to put down our bowls of cereal. But we had no hired help. What we had was our mother, gripping tight. Excuse me. My mother led a disappointing life. She tried to fashion a home with the resources at hand. Rather than bemoan what she lacked, education, funds, a supportive husband, she used what was hers, a pair of hands, fleshy and muscled, no nail polish, no jewels, her only adornments, burns, bruises, and scrapes. My mother plowed through life, wooden spoon in one hand, screwdriver and hammer in the other. It's amazing what the hands of an angry woman can do.
Wow.
It's very graphic. My name is Janice McLean Henson, and this is a remembrance of my mother, Frances Patricia McLean. And, no, not Henson. My mother's story is in 3 parts because my 2 sisters are here, and each of us wrote our memories of my mother. Evelyn has a beautiful poem, and my sister Lilith, an incredible, touching history of my mom. My mother was born in 1905 and St. Patrick's Day, so of course she was called Pat. And she died in 1995. So here I go. In the early 19th century, the great influenza was in full force in Buffalo. My grandmother's youngest sister, Delia, had 2 children and another on the way when her husband was taken by the dreaded disease. True of Irish immigrants, they took care of their own. So my grandmother sent her 7-year-old daughter to move to help Delia. The child was our mother, and it changed the whole trajectory of her life because she lived with my mother. My mother lived with Delia for 7 years, but she was treated like the hired help. There was little love and no support to this sensitive, very bright child. Mother returned home at 14, just in time to start high school at South Park. Throughout her life, my mother verbally questioned why she was chosen out of her 4 sisters. And my aunts, and then the other thing is my aunts would discuss her childhood, and I remember this very well, but my mother had no memories of her family as a child. She could not participate. I related the story about my mom to a friend, and she said, your mother was probably sent because she was probably the most competent. I think my friend was right, and I only wish that my mom had known that before she had passed away. On the positive side, when my mother returned home, she often took the trolley downtown to the public library, one of her favorite places. My grandmother gave her 6 pennies for 2 trolley rides. Mother took the trolley to the library and on the return trip home, she chose to buy a bag of peanuts. So she would walk from downtown to South Buffalo, read her books, and eat her peanuts. Another significant event for my mom happened when she was in the 8th grade at school 26. All those trips to the library had paid off, and she had received the highest average. And she was the designated recipient for the coveted Jesse Ketchum Award. However, one of her teachers decided that a student with a lower grade, a boy, would get it. Mother's teachers no one protected and defended my mom's right to be the rightful recipient. Over the years, Mother often talked about this. And then before she died, she said, I should have gotten it, Jesse Ketchum. Mother loved the written word. She was an avid reader, and she was really bright. She never missed a chance to look up an unknown word in the Webster New England Dictionary of American Language, College Edition, 1952. The pages were paper thin, and I remember how she would touch her fingertip to her tongue to separate the pages. When she found the looked-for word, it gave her so much pleasure, and then she would share all the information to whoever happened to be around. As I was growing up, I never thought my mother was exceptional. Don't we all think that, Ben? She was just mom, never ma, or only mother. Mom, however, was a genuine Renaissance woman. She was widowed at 47, and 6 of the 8 children were left at home. Everyone thought she would divide up her children to willing family members. Not our mother. Mm-mm. She kept her children, and she raised us on a very limited salary. She was a clerk for the New York State Unemployment Office. My mother could have come back to Buffalo, but she didn't. She chose to raise us single-handedly in Hornell, New York. So the amazing thing about my mother was her mantra. You must have an education. For the girls, she repeatedly said, do not depend on a man to take care of you. Be independent and educate yourself. This is not the usual message in the 1950s for young girls. It was be a nice girl and a nice boy will take care of you. That was the message. My mother's message was totally different. And for that, I am so grateful. Thank you. So I wasn't going to get emotional.
All right, this is about my mother, DeShanto O'Brien Kennedy Rafferty. I love writing about my mother. It cuts across time and space, and it makes me feel close to her. When she was a senior at South Park High School, she told her mother she wanted to go to OLV, Our Lady of Victory, and take care of the babies, the infant home. My wise grandmother told her, you are going to go to Our Lady of Victory nursing school first, get your RN, and then you can take care of the babies, which she did. And lucky for her, because she had something to fall back on. My mother was crazy about my father, George. Their song was As Time Goes By from the movie Casablanca. I watch that movie once a year and feel so close to both of them. My father, a reporter for the Buffalo Times, had the City Hall beat. He captured the pulse and excitement of the city and brought it home with him. My mother thought he was the best, smartest person in the whole world, except for one time. She left the burner on the stove and went to the beauty salon. He was furious and wouldn't pick her up when she called for a ride. As she walked home, she kept saying to herself, damn snot, damn snot. But they got over it. My mother was a people person. In college, I worked part-time at A&A's with several Druval nursing students on her floor. Oh, and I didn't go to Buell. They were astonished and delighted when they found out that I was Mrs. Rafferty's daughter. I was so proud of her. My friends loved her, too. They used to sit around the kitchen table and talk to her, usually over a cigarette and coffee. One time, my friend Kathy Doyle was there with her while I was getting ready to go out. When I went into the kitchen to claim Kathy, I could hardly get her to move. I finally had to pull rank and remind her that she was there to go out with me. My mother and father created an aura of love around their children. They were only married 14 years when Daddy died. We were 12, 7, 6, and 15 months. She never felt sorry for herself. At least we never saw it. My sister Marianne told me that the first Christmas after he died, we were all sitting on the couch opening presents and giving her ours. My mother looked around at us and said, "This is the best Christmas I ever had." Life got better for her. She met another wonderful man, Danny Rafferty, and married him. He treated her with kid gloves, and us kids too. He took her on a trip to Yellowstone, and it was a big deal. I still have some pictures of them there, which I love. He died 4 years after that. And a few years later, she had a gentleman caller, Fran Keebler. He was widowed twice too, and they became companions. They went downtown to the movies at the Shays, the Century, the Lafayette. He had 7 kids and a ton of grandchildren, so she went to his family gatherings as he did to ours. Their friendship lasted longer than her 2 marriages put together. And then there were her grandchildren, all 21 of them. Mother was a frequent visitor at Mary Ann's and loved being there with her 8 kids. My niece, Peggy, Marty's daughter, likes to tell how Grandma would send her down to the corner delicatessen for a pack of Pall Malls and a candy bar for herself. She also told her mother, "Grandma likes Manhattans." I was lucky too. We lived only a few blocks from one another, so when any of my kids got sick, all I had to do was wrap them up in a blanket, dump them off on her couch, and go merrily on my way to work. My brother Jimmy didn't get married or have kids for a while. He lived at home, so she spoiled him rotten. When he came home from work, he would plop himself in front of the TV, and she would deliver his dinner hot off the stove. She was interested in whatever I was interested in. She read The Wife of Bath and Emily Dickinson's critical essays. When I went to India, she read all about India in Compton's encyclopedia. I loved her for that and so much more. I can't wait to be with her in heaven.
Hi, I'm Jacira Gard. My mother called me Jacita. It's a Brazilian. She was Brazilian. Her name was Elza Marcus Gard, and she lived from 1914 to 2000. Mom. The sound of the piano, white felt drums on steel and copper coiled strings, disciplined thumping along measured beats. Small, brown, powerful fingers pushing the keyboard black and white. The giant, shiny black Steinway case. Her straight back, her head tilting, addressing the piano, grappling with it, taming it to tender. The music is a world she creates. She goes there. My mother's sounds are still a different kind of hug. Huge and warm all at once, going on and on, making me a beautiful safe boat of Bach.
Good evening. Am I on mic? Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. My name is Diane Reardon, Diane Sanders Reardon, and I happen to have two mothers, the one who gave birth to me and the one who adopted me. The following poems, though, express some experiences that I had with my first mother, the mother that I met when I was in my 50s. I am daughter. I remember how she looked at me that morning in November, the sun barely breaking through the pearl of dawn. Tiptoeing down the narrow hall, I pause ever so quietly, stand pensively at the door of her tiny room, taking in her curled up form, so still beneath the flowered quilt. Her eyes tremble open, and in her gaze such tenderness, it startles me, and her as well. Let me hold you, her voice a whisper. She pulls back the covers, beckons me near, surprise surfacing in her sudden smile. Lying beside her, warmed now and wrapped, I taste the sweetness once forbidden. We taste the sweetness once forbidden. And then a couple of years later, this was another meeting. It was in a hospital room, and it's called Reconciliation. I abandoned you, my mother said, her voice a whisper from the hospital bed. So frail, so very frail. She lay propped against a pillow, hard and flat. No comfort there. Turning fully toward my face, her words, soft but clear, fill the space between us. A friend who kept her baby asked, "Why doesn't Betsy see her babe?" Stark words pulled from days long past, sparing neither she nor I. I couldn't. It was too hard, she said. That's just the way it was. I am immovable, afraid to breathe, her words touching some knowing place, unfathomable and deep. Her words press on as if afraid to stop. All my life, I felt the babies knew. They would cry when I held them. I always thought they cried for you. I turned toward her then, softened, released. I don't feel abandoned now, I said, and gently touch her cheek.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here and for sharing our mothers with us. I am Juliana Ritchie, and my mother was Juliana Matilda Polovich, which is not Italian, in case you were wondering. The title of my piece is Like Mother, Like Daughter. I wrote a poem once about childhood memories of my mother ironing, a regular part of her household duties. To relieve the tedium of the task, she would sing along with music on the radio in a husky voice that I never recognized as hers. I never questioned her about it, keeping silent as I was taught by both her example and instruction. My father's shift work demanded that he sleep at odd hours, So our quiet demonstrated appreciation for his role as breadwinner. My Italian father was a devoted family man, devastated by a divorce from his first wife and her being awarded full custody of their daughter. My mother understood his bitterness and behaved accordingly, but she also supported Rosemary on the rare occasions when we saw her and was generous to her and her 5 children as they came along. I admired my mother's compassion for an innocent victim an innocent child who had become the victim of divorce, and her sincere Catholic faith, the spirit rather than the law, which engendered it. When I was facing divorce, I recalled that kindness and vowed that my own daughters would never be estranged from their father. As a result, joint custody allowed us to remain a family, even while living separately, thanks to my mother's lifelong example. I learned from my godmother that my mom had been something of a wild child in her youth. She hated living on their farm and her hand-me-down clothes, but loved flirting and barn dances. By watching her dance at every family wedding, I learned the jitterbug and waltz, as well as the polka and traditional Hungarian shadas. In case you don't know what that is, I can't show you. That dance set the gypsy free in both of us. As I got older, I began to understand that much of my mother's nature had been subdued in her attempt to keep her marriage intact. She wasn't exactly unhappy because my father adored her, but he was also very jealous, so she had to be careful. Once, when she mentioned going to beauty school and getting a job, my father's reaction was immediate. No wife of mine is going to work. The neighbors will think that I can't support my family. My mother never mentioned it again, but I sensed her disappointment, second only to the miscarriages she suffered, all boys, shortly after I was born. My only brother's unexpected birth 10 years after me may have been some comfort for that loss, but I'm not sure she ever fully recovered. After my father died, my mother spoke her mind more freely, was still prone to question my life choices and parenting style, but was more mellow, more forgiving, less critical. In turn, I was able to ignore what had once angered or hurt me. When she developed emphysema, I phoned to check in on her every night before bed and stopped by her house more frequently. On Sundays, she cooked my favorite Hungarian foods for an early dinner, and we played two-handed pinochle just as we had when she taught me at 9. Occasionally, I joined her at the church hall for bingo, another game she loved. Working through all the difficult moments in a relationship is what makes them rewarding in the long run, especially when you share genes with someone. Thank you, Mom, for sharing your struggles and the real you with me. I know that without you, I would not be me. Amen.
So hello, everybody. Gee, it's so nice to see so many people here. I'm Jerry Grossman, and I'm going to read a reflection of my mom. I should put into context about the war that Linda referenced. My mother was 24. That's just contextual. And she was at war with my father. So that's some context. So my mother's name was Rita Jane Taggart, and she was born in 1922, January 28th, and died July 18th, 1981. The title of my reflection is, "It was easier to say she was dead." At an early age, about 6 or 7, I learned to make up stories about not having a mother.
My brother was 4 when she left, and I was 11 months. We were sternly instructed never to ask about her for fear of upsetting my dad. She became an apparition of sorts. I imagined her in a nun's habit, an angel, a saint, or a stranger on a street corner looking over me, caring, concerned, loving. These fantasies were helpful in my formative years, filling in for the emotional blanket of darkness that mystified both my brother and me. Telling people that my mother was dead, thank goodness they didn't ask me how she died. It was romantic and evoked a sympathetic response rather than the confusing stories we were told as kids. And the stories were told by my aunts and my uncles because Dad would be very upset if even her name Rita was mentioned. So what I heard as a kid was she went to the movies and a hair in my mouth. There we go. She went to the movies with her girlfriends and she just never came back. She ran away. She got remarried with other children. And her husband doesn't know about you and your brother. She doesn't want your father to know where she lives. Saying she was dead was just much more straightforward and far less complicated. And it garnered compassion for my clinging need for overnights at my girlfriend's or one of my aunts. Even the nuns at my parochial school demonstrated significant attention to me and my brother. All my mothers were men. My father, his 2 brothers, my mother's 5 brothers, and even my older brother were loving, protective, caring figures, except when they weren't. Would my father have doted his unwanted affection on me if I had a mother? For example, he insisted on taking me through the tunnel of love at Coney Island after he had a few beers at the Boardwalk bar. It was creepy and dark as he pulled me to him, a 9-year-old, and he kissed me on the lips as if I were his lover. In my struggle to push him away, I was embarrassed and disgusted. This was one of several occasions of overwhelming shame when I yearned for a mother. She could have prevented this. She would have been my shield, my foil. Yet my father was my mother. There's that Harrigan. He was, except when he wasn't. Yet he did his best despite his untoward behaviors on occasions when he was inebriated. But I kept remembering, my dad is my mom. We always had breakfast and dinner, lunch, not so much. He cleaned, cooked, he ironed, always had a job. And he provided. Times when he was broke, he took up cash collections at the local gin mill to make sure I had a prom dress, new shoes, things other kids had, like a bike, roller skates. I remember him borrowing money from our neighbors in the tenement building in New York City when he needed a few bucks to feed us. When my father did talk about our mother, he would lament, I would kiss the ground she walked on. She was beautiful. She was good. He emphasized, I was a no good, rotten bastard. That's why she left. It was my fault. We lamented too. We said, we know, Dad. My mother was non-existent, except for many years later as an adult. I met her. I was relieved and thrilled to give up the story that my mother was dead. I learned she had remarried and had other children, and she even lived in the same state as I did. In one of our early conversations, when asked what she remembered of me, she said, oh, I don't remember you at all. In an instant, my mother was dead again. No, she was not dead. any longing for mothering died, buried by the weight of her words.
I'm Linda Dracham. Our dear friend Esther Roblin can't be here tonight, so I'm going to read my poem about my mom. My mother was Marion Foresta June. June, strange name for Italian Americans, yes. But as you all know, when many immigrants came through Ellis Island, names were anglicized or changed. So I'm sure when my grandfather said to June, they said, oh, your name's June. I call my poem, my mother lived from 1915 to 2012. I call my poem Marion's Song. It was a good time to be a girl, a good time to love a boy who drove 2 hours to see me, cut his lights 3 times under my window so I could sneak out to smooch in his old Ford. We would meet at the Crystal Beach Ferry to ride across the Niagara River and dream, drink Loganberry, eat sugar waffles, dance under the moon to Dorsey Brothers tunes. It was a good time to be a girl, work in the factory by the tracks, then ride the streetcar to Main Street with my good white gloves and a pocket full of dimes. At the Lafayette Theater after the picture show, we would plan our escape to the Justice of the Peace, then honeymoon with only money for candy bars. It was a good time to choose your man. The marriage certificate proof to my father we could not be undone. It was a good time to start a life, though depression raged, war threatened. I had a sweetheart who promised to love me forever, and he did. Oh, he did.
Thank you to all our readers. I just felt this great surge of bowing to each mother. The stories were so real, so real, and we have a room full of writers.